Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, the number one procurement podcast in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Today, we're going to break from the normal routine that we have. We're going to go into tariffs. So we're going to dive deep to the extent we can and give folks perspective on what they should see and expect to see.
Yeah, this is an important moment for procurement, and I'd like to do a little PSA up front here. What you're about to listen to is Tom and my best take on tariffs as they exist today, just about 1 week after, less than 1 week after they were announced by the current administration. Undoubtedly, we're going to get things wrong. Undoubtedly, we're going to have a few hot takes in there, and those hot takes may not be right. Undoubtedly, there are going to be some data points and some thoughts we have that are just completely off base. So I wanted to kind of put this PSA out. It's a highly fluid situation.
Yeah. We got to riff. We got to riff on things. It's fun back and forth for myself and Alan to learn from each other as folks listen to this too. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of the street. And I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals where we do managed services at a company that we call Summit.
All right, interrupting regularly scheduled programming here to go through some of this tariff. So Alan and I, we had a break last week, so we didn't hop on it. Even if we did record on Tuesdays, a lot of this happened on Wednesdays. And what has happened that kind of changed the world, and there's a lot of different takes on this, but there was the tariffs that are essentially implemented on the world. So everything being imported in the United States is more expensive. They're called, I think, it was kind of the not retaliatory, Alan, but
yeah, they were labeled as retaliatory, but this is called Liberation Day. Liberation Day. Like all good programs, Tom, you have to have a brand, and I think that was pretty brilliant branding for what's going to be a belt tightening moment. So you need to kind of do everything you can to make it sound positive.
Yeah, a brand and a chart. So there's some nice charts as well. They kind of went through and said, all right, the United States, is being charged X percent by other countries. It ended up not necessarily being what they're charging, Alan. It was cool in the sense that they said, all right, we're just going to do half of what you're charging us. But really, it was had to do with the trade deficit divided by something. And then they came up with a certain percentage that they charged half.
Yep.
But
yeah. And I think what it amounted to, if I grossly oversimplified, it was like 34% to China. It was 10% to Europe and a lot of the rest of the world, and then
10 or 20 to the EU.
I thought it was 10, but okay. I could be mistaken about that. But then it was also clearly higher than 34% for a lot of the rest of the world, depending upon size and and what existing tariffs look like coming from certain countries. But already negotiations proceed apace. India's come to the table. Some South American countries have come to the table. It feels like they probably had pre-programmed a few of these deals so that they could have some early wins to try and encourage others, laggards, to get to the table and do some negotiation. As everybody says, the table being Mar-a-Lago. Trump wants to get everyone down to Mar-a-Lago. That's where he does business.
Yeah. So I have the reciprocal tariffs here. So China, the discounted reciprocal tariffs was 34% for China, 20% for the EU.
Okay.
Poor old Vietnam with 46%. And then they just go. Even Japan had 24%. India with 26%, right? The two biggest emerging economies kind of have emerged, being China, and a lot was going to India and other Asian countries. They all got taxed at very high rates. I think the logic is that, okay, well, we're trying, the United States is competing with China. They've been going around some of the tariffs that we've had in place with China, and then going into the Vietnams of the world and trying to
Right
capture
on.
all of that potential supply chain that folks
Yeah.
over the course, like people listening to this, like people have moved manufacturing from China to other countries, and a lot of those are hit with 20+% tariffs.
Yep, I think that's right. And there's one other big one, which is all cars, no matter where they come from, 25% tariff coming into the United States.
Yeah, yeah, that is a reminiscent of Smoot Hawley, right? With the
Yeah.
remember I think we had talked to maybe 2-3 weeks ago just about the different tariffs that were in place during then, and one was I think on light auto at the time because trucks are being imported from Europe and they maintained until today. So yeah, the automotive industry is a lot of jobs in the United States, both in the Michigan area, Detroit, and also now the South. So yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of manufacturing jobs in the U.S.
So it's interesting. I have a couple of interesting thoughts to share about that. So the first is being a sales guy, and this is kind of a sales 101 principle, but it's certainly something I think that most people know about. Tom, have you heard of the principle of anchoring?
I have.
Anchoring.
Yes.
You know about anchoring.
Yeah.
Anchoring is all about kind of your first opening bid in a negotiation. And Trump is quite well known for his strong ability to anchor. So, shock and awe. Everybody, when Trump was seen holding up that chart that showed all the tariffs, everybody's jaw hit the floor. That's a sign of good anchoring. So
Yeah.
here's my first salvo. It's going to make everybody sweat. It's going to make everybody worry. And boy, did the world worry. I think yesterday the tweet came out and he was saying, "Don't be a panicking. Don't be a panicking. Everybody is panicking." So
Okay.
and so, isn't that great? He anchors in a tariff spot to make everyone panic, and then he tells them, "Don't panic. What are you panicking for? Let's talk. Let's have a negotiation here." But that anchoring becomes important because it sets everybody's mind to terror, and so then the outcome that's likely to happen in the short or medium term instantly becomes an accepted good outcome. So that's the first point I'd like to make is this opening salvo is an anchor. The second piece is I feel as though this is. And let me say back. As a part of that anchoring too, there was a very interesting back and forth between China and America. China has been very fast to retaliate, but did you see Trump's super fast Uber retaliation right back?
Yeah, he said
He
it'll
said
be
we're going to
100.
increase. Yes, we're going to increase what we did by 50% if you retaliate. So it's kind of like a showdown going on here. Okay, so that's the first point is all around anchoring.
Yeah,
Kind of like
they based on
showmanship.
that, China had accused the U.S. of blackmail after after Trump threatened more tariffs.
Isn't that's pot and kettle meet each other, please. But,
Yeah.
but the second point is I actually do believe that it is somewhat settled economic and finance science that tariffs in general are bad for everybody. And I don't think that there's anyone, Scott Bessent, who's running Treasury for Trump. He's not stupid. Super smart guy.
Yeah.
Broke the Bank of England when he started his career in his 20s. Super smart guy. I don't think that there's anyone who would say long-term tariffs are a good idea. But I do think that everybody looks at the world as it exists today and understands the kind of the economic spot that America's in is unsustainable. We can't continue to print money, run up debt. We can't continue to let important manufacturing industries entirely offshore. Some of them need to be onshore. It doesn't need to be 100% onshore. And in addition, I think that this is kind of one of the bigger principles that's in my mind right now. For the last 10 years, I've bought into the idea from the from the geopoliticians, and it's almost all of them, that say China is headed for a collapse. China is headed for a demographic collapse. They do not have population to be the country that they are today, even 10 years from now. So if that's true, everybody's for the last 10 years has said America needs to get serious about reshoring and decoupling. Decoupling was a big word for a long time. But really what it is it's reshoring because this manufacturing just won't be able to take place in China. If you have a significant piece of your supply chain that comes out of China, you need to have 10 years ago started thinking about how do I How do I fix this when the coming demographic collapse happens? And I think I think the smart people in our country who looked at this said, we just haven't been moving fast enough. Well, what happened last week is all of a sudden the accelerant that makes that happen so fast, because it has to. We're behind the eight ball already. So that's the second big thing. First thing is anchoring. Second big thing is, I think, this reshoring. While it won't happen 100%, it needs to happen. It needs to happen somewhat quickly. It needs to happen to a significant degree.
Yeah, I remember back when I first started my career, I started off in manufacturing. I forget if I told this story before, Alan, but there was the so in like refineries, there was a big like buy US push. So things like pipe valves, fittings, and like, big valves, stuff that historically could, like pumps, things of that nature. There was a big push to, like, you have to buy US, and everything got waived. It always got waived because there was absolutely no
Yes.
manufacturing in the early 2000s of these type things that historically, right, being out in Pittsburgh or down in Texas, like, this is stuff that you're doing all the time, you're using all the time, but it ended up being so much less expensive to purchase it from China. Was really the one that came up and did a lot of that at the time. So it was a lot of waiving, and I feel like we've kind of just gotten to the waiving mode within the United States just over time.
Agreed.
And this isn't like pro-American or anything. It's kind of just like, it's kind of a bummer is what it is, right? And you see a lot of the memes of, like, you see the AI generated things of, like, folks working in factories doing the sewing, but they're dressed in, like, modern day clothes. There's a lot of Americans. It's very unlikely, like, that Americans really are going to be pushing for a lot of those jobs, but there is opportunity still with certain versions of immigration to have versions of that people would love to have those jobs, like, love in the sense that it's not like maybe the job that they'll want their kids to have, but they'll do it for themselves, just like probably your parents or your grandparents had done for you, right? So I think there's a lot of that still is, there's opportunity here within the US to not build everything, but build a lot of stuff.
Well, and I actually, this is actually one of the things that gets under my skin more than anything else about this discussion. Everybody talks about perhaps Trump's nostalgia for the 1950s, or everybody thinks that manufacturing is going to come back and it's going to be like it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Actually, I think that's completely the wrong picture. When things come back, they never, ever come back the same.
Yeah.
Nobody's sewing like in those old pictures, but in modern clothes. When you think about the reason for offshoring that happened to China, tons and tons of reasons. If the quality had not been there, we never would have done it. Why was the quality there? It's because the factories are new, glistening. They are mechanized.
Yeah.
They have robots. And that leapfrog that China had over us in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I think it was largely Japan in the 70s and 80s, and then Japan in the 90s and 2000s. That leapfrog
China
is the
in
same
90s and
leapfrog.
2000s, yeah.
Yeah, China. Sorry,
Yeah,
China, 90s, 2000s. That leapfrog that happened then, we're going to do the same thing, the exact same thing. Our factories are going to be that much more glistening and that much more mechanized and efficient and effective.
Yeah. So in prior lives, I had to go visit certain not refining, but certain manufacturing sites. And the ones in China, way nicer. Like, I'm right on board with you. And it's even the things that are like, where a lot of people are actually in the mix of being the ones working. It wasn't like the, little widgets. It was, big industrial stuff. I mean, just the ceilings are higher, right? Like, the places are bigger. They're properly located on waterways versus in the US. I would just hear about how we used to build those things here before. Just for example, like modules, right? These modules where you kind of build a plant and it's kind of like stackable, like a stackable plant. So you build like pieces, then you kind of put it on top of one another, and then you connect it. Like, that's the basic idea of it. In China, I mean, I don't know what the footage was of these places in China, but people would tell me that had been around and I was learning from, like, yeah, they used to have this one right down the road in North Carolina. And what is it now? It's just basically, overgrowing with weeds. That's a lot of what's happened within U.S. industry and manufacturing. Yeah, and then there's the opportunity to your point. I think it's a good point of bringing back differently.
Oh
It's
yeah.
okay if robots are half of the workforce, if you still have the other half of people working, and you have not only about the folks working and paying the taxes, but you have the certainty of supply, and we have a lot of the raw materials here. But
Yep.
we can't build it still.
Well, and so I think that leapfrog is ready to be in place, almost like a second industrial revolution. It's not going to be that big. Again, what we're going to be reshoring is not 100% of what we offshored. It'll be 30% of what we offshored, but it'll be the crucial 30%.
Yeah.
All of this brings to mind the great article of a few years ago from Mark Andreessen, who, I think he's quite brilliant, venture capitalist,
Yeah. Welcome on the pod
tech
anytime.
guy. Welcome on the pod. We'd be more than happy to have him. He's been making the circuits, so maybe he'll include us. He writes essays from time to time, and he wrote a very prescient essay called "A Time to Build." A Time to Build,
Yep.
where he basically said, we can't get away. Software. One of his big first essays was "Software is Eating the World," where it was all about how software was really taking control of hardware in many ways, and everything was becoming software. Now, this is kind of a counterpoint to that, where he said, "Listen, we've lived and grown in the U.S. for a long time on software and that side of tech, but it's time to build again. We need to make things." And again, feels like that was a very prescient article. It feels like that was suited for today, even though it was written a few years ago.
Yeah. He's somehow he's always thinking about what's next. Him and Ben Horowitz, this podcast I listened to is probably like 2 months ago now. It's just like stuck with me around the supply chain of robots and drones and how China just has it all. And the United States has like zero of it. And even it's because they're good at it, right? Their quality's good. They can make it all, but they have this vertical supply chain of just things that like the US auto industry used to have, right? You have,
Yep.
your body that you're maybe building, and then you have your tires that you get from Michelin, and then all this stuff is
Right.
your hubcaps or rims, all that is just right down the street. They have that for what is the next level of what's going to be, robots and drones and flying cars. So, but they had said
we used to have it. We can have it again.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. And it has to be price competitive, and you have to figure that out. And how are you going to do it? And that's one of the reasons that these tariffs go in place to make things more expensive overseas, which does have short term hurt. And we should probably go in how to deal with short term hurt. But the ability to have those things like drones, it's a big, like, lack of a better term, like war item, right? Like it is like missiles. There's things fly around. I've seen some of those Chinese drone shows. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
You see some of those things?
Oh yeah.
It looks AI generated,
of course.
and I don't think it is.
Of course. I don't think it is. I mean, there is AI behind the scenes controlling those drones that are making those pictures.
Yeah, generated there, but not on a computer screen.
So take the drones as a great example. We have allowed that supply chain to exist almost entirely in a foreign country that is potentially one of our greatest enemies, military enemies. So you think about that sort of a situation. How did we get ourselves in this spot? Well, you say, okay, doesn't matter how we got ourselves there. That's past history. Yeah. Let's fix it. How are you going to fix that except through some massive dislocation? It's going to be, you have to build that stuff. You have to learn how to build that stuff on shore. You have to invest in building that stuff on shore. You have to train a workforce to build. You have to build power plants to power those factories that are going to make those things. You have to bring R&D back. I mean, there's going to be, but you can also say, well, we don't have a choice. Like, we cannot continue to rely on a foreign power, a military enemy, making those sorts of things. We have to have that domestic capability.
Yeah, and we'll see where it goes. But there's I agree. There's a lot of opportunity. I mean, is it all currently malice, and are people enemies? Maybe not. But I think the opportunity to have the review of what should be made here and should be made within any country, I think, is an important one, right? You don't want to have like your whole entire economy outsourced. Essentially, right now, it's pretty crazy the way that this whole entire thing's been structured. Like, we're basically, like, the United States is basically just like that college kid that's just buying a bunch of stuff on credit. And China's basically they're the piggy bank that's loaning out all the money. So it's become this like symbiotic probably unhealthy relationship, like from taking a different angle, Alan. In that China, like folks have always heard, oh, China has our debt, blah, blah, blah. That's because they were sponsoring the ability for us to buy stuff, right? So they were
Of course.
saying,
Yep.
yes, United States, you can take out more
Take our
money.
goods.
We'll load it to you as long as you buy more stuff. That's
Mm-hmm.
the behind the scenes conversation that I'm certain happened. Like, happy to give you
Yep.
more money. You just buy stuff from us. We're like, hey, okay, perfect. And then now you just figure like that college kid's growing up and they're going to be like, you know what? I don't need all the shiny stuff. Like some of my friends or even some of the people who's part of my
Well,
team here that I'm supporting, maybe they want shiny stuff, but we don't need it from you guys. They're going to be like, well, then who are we going to sell it to? And it is not
yeah.
directionally, it's not going to be correct that it could just then go elsewhere because the US consumes, you can say way too much, but consumes a lot and we pay a premium for things.
We're one of the only growing nations, and we have good demographics in the sense that we have young demographics. So we're in a consumer phase. That makes sense. But I do think this is a good segue. I want to pull up your list of the 5 biggest industries in the U.S. and let's talk about each one of them and see how will the tariffs affect these industries. Because my hypothesis, Tom, is we're pretty safe in our biggest 5 industries. However, that consumer side that you just talked about, that's going to be where you feel it. Think about what do you buy on a weekly, monthly basis? I'll tell you, I buy groceries, I make a Costco trip, I buy booze. A lot of those things, some of the booze that I buy comes from overseas. I'm going to have to find a domestic supply of gin, I think. We're going to have to change some tastes, change some habits.
Your cabs,
the things I buy at Costco.
Malbecs.
Do you want to be a merchandiser at Costco right now? Think about the headache in their world. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they're probably some of the best too. But yeah, I'm sure that they hate their lives or love it, one or the other. Some people
It's
are
a
gluttons for
challenge,
punishment.
right?
Yeah, but it's the 5. So what we did, we went through the 5 biggest pieces of the U.S. economy, and then Alan and I we wanted to riff a little bit live here on what will be affected and whatnot. So the one which I didn't really realize, and this is we'll lean and say this is Gemini's fault if any of it's wrong. Feel free to check us here. But real estate, rental, and leasing is $3.8 trillion. That's almost 14% of the economy. So we'll come back to these and go one by one, Alan. Second is professional and business services at also just about 13%, 3.6 trillion. You have government, number 3, which is about 11%, so 3.1 trillion. Manufacturing, amazing. Only 11% of the economy.
Right.
So it means we don't send a bunch of stuff out. That's 2.8 trillion. And then the last one here is finance and insurance, which always boggles my mind how insurance is such a big piece of our economy. But that is what it is. And that's 2 trillion, about 8%. So those are the 3.
And what's amazing? What's amazing to me is that healthcare didn't make the list. It must be number 6.
Yeah, must be number 6, or maybe somehow it got stuffed into professional business services. Who knows? So much to that server had anyway.
Yes, but in essence, if you add all those up, that's 50% of the economy, right? Yep. It's 50%. So we're kind of dealing with the Pareto principle here, the 80-20 rule, so-called 80-20 rule. We're not quite there, but it's hitting these top 5 really, I think, are the important discussions to have. Okay, so number 1 on the list. Read it back again, Tom. What's number 1?
Number 1 on the list is, as he scrolls down, real estate rental and leasing.
Real estate rental leasing.
Building homes,
you had some
fixing homes. Yes. Yeah, the process that people go through for homes. Yeah.
Anything associated with kind of land and land development,
sure,
home, housing, residential, commercial.
Yep.
So that's fascinating.
It is.
A big shift away from commercial to residential. COVID kind of almost permanently changed some of the patterns of things that are happening commercially. So when I think of like business space, when I think of skyscrapers, I think of downtown areas. That's a lot of metal, glass, fixtures, tiles, things that might be tariff prone, can be tariff prone. But so I think the commercial side, which is the one that's decreasing in size, is probably the one that's most open to tariff issues. The residential side, I think of a lot of that stuff being made locally, or at least near shore, like Canada, Mexico. Some of it certainly coming from Southeast Asia, from China. But I think a lot of those supply chains had already started to move, and I bet now they're just being accelerated. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff's probably imported. I mean, maybe this is a follow up we could have about what gets imported versus what's made, call it like in house in the United States. I mean, we manufacture like some plastics here and different things. So like the PVC pipes, they may be made in the US, but a lot of, I mean, woods from Canada, right? You could call that near shore. Maybe we'll get back on in good graces together with Canada. But I think a lot of lumber is brought from there, and probably, some South American countries. But I almost think the way I think about a lot of tariffs and a lot of probably goods that get manufactured is if it's dirty, the U.S. has exported it. So
Right.
a lot of the things, like I do think like PVC, like they maybe we make some here, but probably only if it's an old plant. Any of the new ones are probably being built over there. Like galvanized steel, like galvanization, like a lot of that could get dirty.
Messy.
Yeah,
Yep.
then get dirty.
Yep.
And I know in China they have like they do it in house. They'll make the steel and then they'll send it out to get galvanized, which is like dipped in messy
Yep.
material. So a lot of those things, like I think that's one thing that the U.S. has exported over time is kind of like the dirtiness of things. So, like a lot of those processes. So I think, Alan, when it comes to a lot of that, like HVAC components, looking around my house, even just like, I don't know, drywall
Lighting,
maybe is manufactured in the
fixturing.
US. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you remember there was a big
Fabrics,
issue with
drapes.
the Chinese gypsum, the Chinese drywall, and I think we brought most of that stuff back on shore because they couldn't send it to us without it having significant mold and other
Oh,
quality
interesting.
issues.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that was a big deal 10 years ago. So, but it's interesting because I think a lot of these things can be pulled back onshore or near shore. Mexico's going to be a great partner, and I think
Sure.
can think about so in the lumber from Canada. I think one of my biggest hypotheses about these tariffs, and we talked about this 2 months ago when we had our first tariffs podcast, Tom, you and me, we were well ahead of the curve. This is not really about Canada and Mexico. This is really about China.
Yeah, positioning though. Yeah, to
It's
not just be
positioning.
bullying
So
one guy. I think it's actually a little deeper than that, though, Alan. You want to go a little conspiracy on you?
Please go.
And this
go.
isn't totally conspiratorial. There's a book, and I'm going to read it. But the book is called wait for it. No Trade is Free by Robert Lighthizer, maybe.
Lighthizer, yeah, Lighthizer.
So
He was our trades guy for a bunch of years under first Trump and maybe Bush.
I think he's under Trump again, right? I think
Robert Lighthizer. Yep,
I think he's the Trump's guy. I mean, he's a big bilateral trade agreement guy, as I understand, right? He's not. Yep. He doesn't necessarily want everything just to be flowing so smoothly. He wants the U.S. to kind of more insert itself. And he's not a big fan of the WTO. Like, I don't think he was a big fan of China being admitted to the WTO. And he thinks it led to a lot of this. So just for like background, World Trade Organization is like trading partners. And
I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah, the latter 90s, early 2000s. Was it under Bush?
Yeah. It was late 90s, yeah.
Okay, so Clinton, Bush, whatever. So they were admitted at that time, and then that helped make your 50-cent Walmart T-shirt come to fruition. So, but that was like a big piece of it. So now he's more saying, all right, let's take a step back and let's review a lot of this stuff and just let's go one-to-one with folks. So the alternative it's not necessarily is reworking the world order versus just beating up on China. So this goes to a lot of the European 20%. Like post World War II, those folks were all like we're on the same page, and maybe not so much going forward. Might be the idea. So
yeah,
the book I'm going to read though, just for folks want that. I was going to repeat it because I think it sounds pretty cool. No Trade is Free.
No Trade is Free. A recent book. Is this?
Yeah,
was this
recent.
Out?
I think it's recent.
Okay. I'm going to add it to my list. It's good. I've got a long car drive coming up. I'm going to go get the Audible.
Yeah, they do have it on Audible.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So that's industry number one. Hit us with number two.
So number two on our list, and this is again the GDP focused is professional and business services. I'll let you take this one on.
Well, this is right up my alley, right? This is what we do. We are a professional service. So this is white collar work. This is knowledge workers by and large,
Yeah,
providing any number of services.
consultants, accountants, procurement
And
people.
I have reached out since last week. I was at a conference, a procurement conference last week, surrounded by a bunch of professional services folks, and I asked everyone who I knew who was smart in this industry, and I've asked a bunch of people this week since. Does anyone have an idea? So let's think about BPO. Let's think about all the outsourced services that come from India, like call center or finance and accounting or procurement outsourced services. I mean, that's a big industry. I'm going to guess that India has millions, maybe
Yep.
tens of millions of people working on these sorts of services. Is that considered a product that can be tariffed? So when those services are performed overseas, is there a tariff that hits those services that a U.S. Purchaser needs to pay? I don't know the answer, and I've not found anybody who knows the answer to that question just yet.
If there is,
My guess
a lot
is
of people
it's
aren't
gray.
following the rules.
Oh
Right?
boy, you're not kidding. You're not kidding. So I would I'd put a pin in that and say TBD. We need to come back to this one because I think it's a fascinating question. It's obviously second largest industry by GDP, and I don't know how much of that comes from overseas, but my guess is a big chunk of it. It's certainly probably in the 30 to 40% range, 30 to 50% range. But a lot of that's onshore today already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just the things that might affect folks that have, say, some version of like professional services. You buy computers, you buy all these other things. From a margin perspective, is quite small for the tariffs, but yeah, your office furniture, things like that, right? So it'll affect those
That's right.
folks. A lot of those things, I would say, Alan, though, those will be affected and probably most of it not brought back onshore. If you think like even furniture manufacturing, I don't know how much of that's done in the US anymore. I feel like that's very much just packed up and sent. Like nicer stuff, sure, but like you're just call it like the IKEA-ish type stuff.
IKEA-ish, yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
IKEA-ish. A lot of it's IKEA, Wayfair, that kind of thing. But yeah, furniture, maybe some like, I don't know, R&D instruments, maybe some of those things could be brought on shore, or I would say more if those are, they're probably already here. Telecom,
Yeah,
things of that nature.
right. So yeah, I think you were kind of seeping into bucket number 3, right? When you talk about manufacturing.
Well, maybe I'm more talking about implications to the service industry of tariffs. Agree. From a
Okay.
buyer of them, no, but you always pay a certain margin. Their margin will be eaten to marginally, which I think is kind of what we're both saying here. The only thing is if we're purchasing services, then who knows? TBD.
Yeah. So maybe to put a little bow on the services industry, what's happened over the course of the last 30 years for the outsourced services that come from other low-cost countries is those low-cost countries have become more expensive, and the delta that makes for the business case that says we should buy overseas has gotten smaller. So there's already been a natural pull back to onshore or nearshore on those.
Yeah, COVID did a decent amount of that too, where folks just got so disrupted to the extent that maybe they're going to pay a percentage higher. They just were like, I just need this darn thing closer. Right. It was like kind of that, like,
Yes.
deep sigh. Like, I just can't have things all over the world. I need like at least this piece of my supply chain, like next door to me.
Yes. All right. Number 3 is manufacturing.
No,
so this
number
is the
3.
big one.
Number 4 is manufacturing, Alan. Number 3 is government.
Government. Okay. I skipped over government. See, I just skipped it because that is all onshore. That is going to be tiny effect, and we're already making that smaller. I think we should jump right to number 4, manufacturing, which to me is the big one.
Yeah.
Right? This is the big one.
It's the piece of the conversation, right?
It's the biggest piece because a lot of manufacturing that's done here even is components and parts and labor, and as you kind of mentioned it, the messy stuff oftentimes happens overseas. And I hear a lot of people talking about how interdependent and networked supply chains are today. So whereas previously everything would be vertically integrated, made kind of like you said, the automotive industry in America in the 50s, 60s, 70s was you go down the street to get the hubcaps, you go down the street to get the tire. A lot of that's been pushed overseas. But in addition, there's a lot of cross-border action that happens today. Something might be made in the U.S., shipped to Canada for some processing, goes to Mexico for something additional. Everybody's talking about the kind of the length of the supply chain over the last 20 years has gotten a lot longer. I think that is and everybody's saying, how are tariffs going to affect that? I think that's just a math issue in my mind. So what's going to happen is we're going to not tariff something 10 times. What we're going to do is we're going to weighted average tariff something based upon where certain finishing is done in different countries so that the overall tariff remains kind of on par with everything else. We're not going to punish cross-border manufacturing activity, I don't believe. I think there's going to be math that comes into play to make sure those tariffs are at least on par.
Yeah, maybe in the future. I think right now it feels crude. The math is going to be done. Yeah, but I mean the big piece for manufacturing right now to me is even if you're building stuff within the U.S. as a finished good, okay, maybe you're doing that Canada Mexico thing, which was the NAFTA, whatever we call it now, where it could just be free flowing. That was the idea, right? Because Canada wages are about 70% of the U.S., Mexico even less. So it's taking advantage of just our neighbors to be able to do some of those things. But I think the biggest piece for that, Alan, is a lot of the imports from other countries that go into what might be a finished good. The cars, right? Okay.
Yep.
Whatever manufacturer has a car manufacturer, auto manufacturer has, they make their model in South Carolina. How much of that? Okay, they're putting it all together. The windshield gets put on, the tires get put on the side. The button for the radio gets pushed in. But where's that button coming from? Where are those tires coming from? Where's the windshield coming from? Maybe you're doing definitely the like the car itself, the steel frame, but where's the rest of that car coming from? I think that's a lot of what these tariffs are going to affect, because the United States may manufacture something in-house in country, but components are from everywhere.
Yes. And that's my point is, I think that when a component comes in, it will be taxed at some sort of a listed tariff rate. But where you have subassemblies that kind of go back and forth, you're not going to get the cumulative effect of a tariff every time it crosses a border. I don't believe. I think it's going to be looked at as a system. And then there's going to be an algorithm that determines the tariff on the overall subassembly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends which countries, because some things might start off in whatever, call it South American country. Raw material may land in China, be brought in as something, turned into something else, and then that piece, or 17 of the pieces then get sent over to the US where they put it inside the car, right? Or like Taiwan with the semiconductors. Understanding I don't know if they're exempt from all this tax situation, but just use them as example. Like, in order to make a car, you need 50 of those, those semiconductors, and then those get brought into the to make the car. So yeah, I mean, taxes are complicated. I've had to deal with Argentinian taxes. The U.S. is actually quite simplistic historically, like relatively speaking. Argentina, Brazil, very complicated. I definitely don't want to land there where we become more complicated and start going like to the, sub component of, which isn't what you're saying, but I just don't want to get there either.
Yeah, I agree. I think with this notion of anchoring and kind of this shock and awe, I think that we're at a very beginning point right now, and I think that we're gonna land in a much simpler spot. What's number 5?
Number 5 is the insurance sector, finance and insurance.
Yeah, lots of
like 11% of the economy. Some of these things, when you start looking at them, you're like, gosh darn, like,
wow,
how services based are we? Because you have real estate rental and leasing is number 1, fine. Like, how much value is that actually adding? Not sure. Then number 2 is professional and business services, and then skip
3 is government
and manufacturing, and then you
only
have
one is
manufacturing. Yeah, 11% of the economy is manufacturing.
I hope
some of these numbers are wrong.
4 to 1 services to building stuff. Is what this
government
can
call 50-50 or something. But hopefully they're doing some projects.
Yeah. So, but obviously, I think that a lot of the finance and insurance industry is knowledge work. It's a lot of stuff on computers. So, yeah, we rely for a lot of those components, the IT stuff overseas, but it's a lot of professional services that probably come from bucket number 2. That is largely, a lot of it going to be onshore, but some of it being offshore. But it feels to me like this is manageable. This feels like not a tough bucket. This is not a bucket that's going to be impacted incredibly hard by tariffs.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree.
So it's interesting looking across this whole list. It gave me. I appreciate the digging that you did, Tom. It gave me an appreciation for the fact that maybe the impact won't be as painful as I thought it would be. No, I'm not at all saying there won't be pain. For sure, there will be pain. But it led me to believe that perhaps the biggest piece of our economy will be a bit immune. Maybe not surprising, given that only 10% of our economy is based on manufacturing. You go to a place like China, where 90% of their economy is based on manufacturing. I think that's why this administration is playing the hand that they're playing, because the cards kind of landed in their favor. Now, for sure, I think both of us should just like stack hands and say, for sure, there's going to be a lot of disruption here. I read on X every day about people who say, here's what my supply chain looked like last week. Here's what it looks like this week. It's insane. My business is going to have to close down. I hear a lot of doom and gloom, but you don't hear a lot of the positive side of there are going to be some businesses that boom locally because of this, as you decide to start buying stuff onshore that might be made onshore today, and the jobs that will be created with that. So, it's a very interesting thing to think about the positive side of it, when I think largely what we hear is the doom and gloom negative side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just folks need to start, they need to, especially if you haven't started in your org, which there's probably more than you'd like, Alan, but reviewing your supply chain, like reaching out to folks, figuring out what is the diversity of your major suppliers, where are they sitting, all that does need to be mapped out for the good of the company. And if not, it leaves you, back-footed, reactive, which is never a good spot.
Never a spot to be.
No.
Yeah,
just in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also just make sure your C-suite, if you are C-suite, make sure you understand what's going on, right? Because folks need to have a good sense of the impacts of whether it's tariffs, whether it's natural disasters, all this stuff needs to be mapped out. And it's just a good reminder of that.
Yeah. So Tom, you and I think that was a good rundown. You and I talked basically since last week about how we think the issue around tariffs is going to be a huge one, and how we want to make that a pretty significant focus of this podcast going forward. To that extent, you and I both have good networks of people who are smart on these topics. We have good networks of procurement professionals who are dealing with this stuff today, but have dealt with it in the past as well. And I think it's our intention to bring some of those smart thinkers, some of those thought leaders on these issues to the podcast, so that we can, again, live up to our motto, which is making you smarter than your procurement peers, you, the listener. So I'm really looking forward to where this is going.
Yeah. And if you're smarter than your peers, in this case, it's just your business will be smarter overall when it comes to these kinds of things. So, I think should be the right focus for folks.
Good. All right. What do you think? A wrap?
Let's wrap it up.
All right. On behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tom Finn, the guy who puts the fin in finance, and your OG of procurement, maybe one day a tariff thought leader, Al Veek, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.